I'm former detective Mark Williams-Thomas, and I'm investigating the other side of Jimmy Saville. One former BBC employee has already told me that she saw him sexually assault a girl in his dressing room, just minutes after the girl attended the recording of one of his shows. At the time, she believed the girl was just 14 years old. It seems almost unthinkable that one of the biggest stars of children's TV could be preying on the very kids who appeared on his BBC programmes. But tales of Saville's behaviour towards young girls had their roots back in his early career. Back in the 50s, Saville started off running dance halls in the north of England. In 1958, he was spotted by Radio Luxembourg and signed up as its star DJ. Then in 1964, his larger-than-life personality was unleashed on the nation when he was asked to present the first edition of the new BBC programme, Top of the Pops.
Welcome to January the 1st, 1964. It's 6:34 p.m. and it's a programme that you've never heard of before. It's called Top of the Pops, and there's the charts.
Around the same time, he was also asked to appear on a BBC radio talk show called Teen Scene. Its producer was Wilfred Diath.
Well, he had a reputation. I mean, he had a shocking reputation for young women, but I mean, it was all hearsay, and I didn't know whether to believe it or not. As I shall repeatedly say, he never attempted to hide this predilection, so it was generally known that he was into young girls.
Days before the recording, Wilfred says Saville, then in his late 30s, asked to meet him in a Chinese restaurant in central London. But when Wilfred turned up, he says Saville wasn't alone.
I turned up at the Lotus House, I think it was on a Friday evening, and there he was sitting on a banquette with this very young girl. I would guess she was 12 if you'd asked me to guess. It could be that she was 13, 14, but I would have said 12. I asked him where he'd found her. I said that to him, where did you pick her up? And he said, Top of the Pops. I think it was the previous night. Top of the Pops went out on a Thursday night. And I said, I remember saying, is that your happy hunting ground? And he said, yes. And that was the extent of my conversation about the girl, because I found it rather demeaning to be having to talk to him in front of a little girl like that. And then we made an arrangement that I would ring him next morning at the Mascot Hotel. And next morning I rang him, and he was obviously in bed with this young girl. In fact, he said he was in bed with her. And he asked me to talk to her, and I had to rather demean myself by saying hello. And she said, hello, Mr. Producer. And that was, I refused to have any more. I didn't want to talk to her again. I talked to him. We discussed that he would come in on a Sunday night for the live transmission, and that was the extent of it.
What made you think she was 12?
Well, I've had two daughters, so I'm fairly, I know about little girls. I've absolutely no doubt in my mind that she was between 12 and 14. I'd have gone to the lower end of that.
Did you tell anybody else about this?
Everybody knew that he was constantly in the company of underage girls. So it wasn't really very remarkable. It was just that I had evidence of it for the first time. Having heard a lot of gossip, I saw with my own eyes how he was behaving.
After leaving the BBC, Wilfred had his own troubles, spending 2 months in jail for credit card fraud. But he has firm views about what he witnessed back then.
Now I feel more confident and more mature, and I would have undoubtedly reported him. But in those days, I was extremely vulnerable myself. I was a very, very junior producer. I was rather overwhelmed by his celebrity. Now, the other thing I've got to say, I was actually rather frightened of him. I wasn't a very strong person. He was a beefy guy. He was brawny. He'd been a coal miner. He was a wrestler. If he'd found out that I was grasping him to the top in the BBC, I won't say he would have killed me, but he'd have knocked me out, no doubt about it. And I was a bit frightened of him.
Back in the 60s, Saville was constantly surrounded by young girls. Never more so than while he was running clubs in the north of England. Alan Leake was a reporter on the local newspaper in Manchester. He was also a regular at the city's Bellevue Top 10 Club, where he says stories circulated about Saville and teenage girls.
Girls of 20 plus were never, ever of interest to him at all. It was always the teenage girls. And in those days, you couldn't tell whether a girl was 15, 16, 17. And, you never asked for a birth certificate in those days. It was the era of free love.
What was his pattern?
He'd normally offer to take them for a drive in his Rolls Royce or his E-Type, and he would go off with them half, three-quarters of an hour, and then just roll back at the Top 10 Club as if nothing had happened, and just carry on and do his show.
Alan says he made several visits to Saville's homes, once for a pre-arranged interview, but Saville was otherwise engaged.
We'd just been talking generally when a girl arrived. She was a teenage girl, I couldn't tell what age. But as soon as she arrived, Saville took her off into what I assume was his bedroom. He was only in there about 10 minutes when he came out on his own and proceeded, without any bashfulness or anything, to wash himself off in the sink, which I thought was quite an unusual thing to do. And then this girl came in, joined us for 10 minutes, and then I went off. I hadn't got a story, but it was very plain to me that he didn't want me there any longer, so I left.
The contrast between some accounts of Saville's private life and his public image is stark. He was earning himself a reputation as a charity fundraiser, and through TV coverage like this, he was becoming famous as a volunteer hospital porter at his local Leeds General Infirmary. In March 1972, he collected an OBE. But what the public didn't know was that during this time, at least 2 young women now say he had started a sexual relationship with them when they were still 15-year-old schoolgirls. 40 years later, both women have agreed to speak out on the condition we protect their identities. They have families who know nothing about their past relationships with Saville. Both women are wearing wigs. We've changed their names and disguised their voices.
I think people need to know that there was another side of him, and it was quite a dark side. He was a predator, really, a predator on young girls.
One day in 1969, Val says she was introduced to Saville through a friend during a visit to the BBC. She was 15, he was in his early 40s. She says she soon became one of a select group of teenagers whom he would regularly invite into his dressing rooms, often during recordings of Top of the Pops.
The first time something happened, he actually got me into it was like an alcove in the dressing room, and he pushed me back against the wall, and then it was a hand up the skirt and touching me.
And when he put his hand up the skirt, did he touch you intimately?
Yes, yeah.
And what did he say anything? Did anything happen when he did that?
Thinking about it, I don't think he ever did say anything. But whenever he did that, because he did it on various occasions in various places, and it was always very quick, a quick fumble, and he was very strong, and he would pin you up against somewhere, quick fumble, hand up the skirt, and that was it. So it would be, he would grab any opportunity to do it. So other times it would be in the corridor again. If there was an alcove, he'd just push you into the alcove, quick fumble, and then carry on as normal.